Let's go back in time again. Remember the way we started. Everything was new 25 years ago. What a great time to show for the memories. Looking ahead, there's so much that we can share. The laughter, the drama, together we'll be there. Celebrate the proud tradition. Big 13, the proud tradition.
It's a proud tradition, all right. A lot of people have grown up with Channel 13 here in the Bay Area, raised families and spent their working years with the tradition of news, weather, sports, and entertainment on WTVT. Hello, I'm Jerry Krumholtz, and I've been here a lot of those years myself, along with a lot of other people you know here on Channel 13. Some of us have been going back over those years the last few days, remembering things that even some of us have just about forgotten. It's funny, the way a lot of these things have changed, and yet how many of the things still seem the same. Whether you were here when Channel 13 first went on the air on April 1st, 1955, or are a newcomer, we think you'll find it fascinating to see how things were and what some of today's personalities looked like back then. Back in the 60s, anyone visiting our studios in the late afternoon would have found a scene of frantic activity as the crew got ready for the Giant Kids Matinee. There was the charming hostess, Mary Ellen, Popeye Playhouse, Poop Deck the Parrot, and in later years, the twin worms, Bugsy and Mugsy. Now, they sure kept the kids quiet after a hard day at play or in school. And some may remember those little skits Mary Ellen did. Not exactly heavy on plot, but with a lot of audience involvement, you might say, with an occasional unscheduled complication. One of the biggest stars for kids of all ages was Shock Armstrong, the all-American ghoul.
You know what Bob Olson called me in to announce that I was going to host Shock Theater as Shock Armstrong. He wasn't too much help. He simply handed me an old Tampa U football uniform with a 13 on it and a mask and said, "Paul, you're a teenaged ghoul." Well, from that came Shock's personality, which was simply an exaggeration of many of my personal frustrations. For instance, a mother who always wanted the room cleaned, a nosy neighbor next door who thought he could meddle in my affairs, and a general mistrust of all authority figures. I guess I was as surprised as anyone that the character caught on as well as it did. But looking back at what happened later in the 60s, it seems to me that Shock was probably just a forerunner of a movement among the young that was to make history.
The Cool Ghoul was so popular that when the station tried to replace him with the Joey Bishop Show back in 1967, the viewers rebelled. And they got their way. Shock was back with his spooky movies a few weeks later. And we'll bet there are some folks still watching with Shock's very own autograph still stashed away somewhere. Well, a reasonable facsimile of his autograph anyhow.
3D Danny are brought to you by Tarno Cuban Sandwiches, 7-Up, the Fresh Up drink, Wholesome Orange Raisin Bread, and Foremost Multivitamin Milk. So stand by. We're about to travel into the future with 3D Danny.
And talk about tradition. A long time before Star Trek or Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, there was our very own 3D Danny. And the station spared no expense in providing the highly technical equipment for those space jaunts.
I've got a wonderful idea. The Psycho Periscope. The Psycho Periscope? Go get it. Okay, I'll get it right now. Boys and girls, we'll get our periscope, turn on the electricity and the volume, and you can see right into my head. And you can tell what I'm thinking. Hey, sir. Boy, that's exciting. That's what we'll do. Ready? All right, I'm going to... Wait a minute. I'll have to stand in front of it, of course. So you follow me right over here. Very important that I get in front of it. Ready? Just right. That's about right, sir. Oh, this is a wonderful invention, boys and girls. Well, you see it work. You're going to enjoy it. Be careful
Okay,
now.
stand by. Here comes the power.
All right, watch your juice there.
Here we go.
Here we go. Tell me when it's on.
Okay.
So I can start my thinking.
There it is.
Yes, what am I thinking about, boys? Watch. I'm thinking about a 7-Up float. Remember one thing, too, about 7-Up. You like it. It likes you.
Just give me Dixie, where folks are smiling, and all the while inviting you there. Friends will greet you, say I'm glad to meet you. Sunshine is everywhere.
To paraphrase a popular commercial, tradition on Channel 13 could be spelled E-R-N-I-E. Lee, that is. He's been getting people up and going in the morning almost since the station went on the air. First, it was the Good Day Show with Herb and Kay and the gang. Others have come and gone, but Ern is still there, getting the day off to a great start for the viewers and for the station, topping the ratings every year he's been on. But we don't think Ernie will ever get Best Actor of the Year, and the newsmen Ron Meyer and Dick Harvey won't make Best Supporting Actor either.
Well, boys, I'll just tell you that I think Halloween's the greatest time of year. In fact,
I've been silly. It really
I'm
is.
a full believer in all the pollywog that takes place on Halloween.
Well, I'd have to see it to believe it.
There's no such thing as magic and spooks and goblins and that type of thing.
I mean, there might be some Irish gremlins or something like that, but I don't know.
If you fellows don't quiet down and quit talking about Halloween, I'll prove my point.
How?
I dare you.
You dare me. You fool with me, I'll change you both into pumpkin.
That I got to see.
Zap! Did it work?
I always wanted to get ahead.
Hey.
Sort of a squishy feeling in here.
Did it work? I reckon it did.
Get your hand off my head.
When most people think of Channel 13, they think of news, and the weather and the sports, of course. The person who's been involved with the news for a good many of our 25 silver years is still calling the shots. Hugh Smith, who came here in 1963 and has been news director since 1968.
Good evening, I'm Hugh Smith. We don't usually begin this Pulse program from a helicopter, but that's where I am now, and the picture you're seeing is being televised live from a helicopter about 500 feet up above downtown Tampa. It is not a videotape recording you're watching, this is live. And we are doing it to formally announce that of all the television stations in this area, only Channel 13 now is able to report the news live from where it is happening and when it is happening. That was May 17th, 1976, and all of us at Channel 13 News were flying pretty high that day, excited about continuing a tradition begun back in the 1950s, when Pulse started out a bit differently.
This is Pulse, the heartbeat of a changing world. A 60-minute report of the events which are, at this moment, filling today's chapter in the Chronicle of Time. Produced by the award-winning WTVT News, Weather, and Sports staff.
There weren't very many of us then, just a handful of people and about that many cars. It took only a few minutes to gather both for a parking lot photograph. We made history in November of 1956 with the nation's first hour-long television news program. About 7 years later, that hour became 90 minutes when the tradition continued in September of 1963 with the first hour-and-a-half information program. Almost from the start, Cy Smith wrote the station's editorials beginning in October of 1958, and he has been doing so ever since, more than 21 years. Black and white gave way to color in June of 1966 when Channel 13 was the first Bay Area station to add that dimension to its broadcasting. The big stories? Well, we remember Earl Wells going to Cuba to interview a certain bearded leader no one took very seriously, at least not at first. And none of us will ever forget this scene in Tampa in November of 1963, just 10 days before another historic day in Dallas.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Other presidents would come to the Bay Area to be seen by Channel 13 cameras. There was that sunny morning in St. Petersburg in February of 1976 when some listened, and some chose to put on a show of their own.
we've already begun to take extensive steps to correct these problems. And we will make sure that if any American qualifies for these benefits, he or she will get them, period.
But the sun does not always shine on Florida. There was flooding back in the 50s. And in November of 1973, the Bay Area saw one of the most devastating tornadoes in a long time skip its destructive way across a wide section.
We were in the front room watching television, and we heard this terrific roar. I thought maybe it was a plane.
The dream of many reporters is to cover the big story, a story big enough to be included on the CBS network. Many Channel 13 reporters have been seen and heard on CBS News, others on the network in a much different way.
Morning, Captain.
Good morning, Captain.
Good morning, Captain.
Morning, Captain.
Good morning.
Elections, Channel 13 has been there for all of them over the years. Crawford Rice, you'll hear more about him shortly, has covered his share of election returns programs, as has Ray Densler, who for many years anchored the Daily Pulse programs, reported the news on weekends, wrote and produced documentaries, managed a growing news staff, and to this day is the person who delivers all those editorials Cy Smith has been writing.
When you are flying through the skies over Florida, you are being carefully watched from this government complex in a small North Florida town.
Even when business is off slightly around here, it's still the envy of many shopping centers and malls around the country.
She's part of an amazing performing act made up of 6 musical bears and 1 very strange bird. And all of them are the product of this man's imagination.
That was something new which began on several major television stations around the state, including Channel 13 last year. A weekly magazine program about people, places, and things in Florida, hosted here by our John Nicholson.
Next time you button yourself up in the family car and hit the interstate highways or the backwoods roads.
Ray Blush is one of several members of the Channel 13 news staff whose reporting has been recognized through awards. This is an investigative report he did about dangers to the driving public from chemicals leaking from those huge tank trucks. A tradition, too, has been the weekly panel interview program we call Insight. People in the news, senators, governors, members of Congress, candidates and their opponents interviewed on just about any topic under the sun. And while newsmakers and reporters usually know what we want to say, sometimes putting all the words together isn't easy.
This is Joe Lockman welcoming Walter Cronkite to the Pulse team. He'll be joining you each night at 6:45 to bring you all the world and national news backed up by CBS News correspondents the world over. So join us each weekday night at 6.
Good morning. I'm Rod Challenger, and this is Pulse Final. President Carter has reversed one of General's...
Backed up by CBS News correspondents all over the globe.
Jim Anderson of Houston apparently isn't too worried about what's in. He's more interested in what used to be in, like in the Victorian era. Dark shadows upon the picture. Now we're back again.
What does a windy day like today have to do with making new friends? Well, quite a bit, if you are one of 750 elementary school students in Dunedin. Pulse 13's Tim Smith tells us about the connection.
Among the many honors won by Channel 13 News over the years were 2 Emmy Awards, presented late last year to Ray Blush for an expose of the dangers in hauling hazardous materials, and to Larry Elliston for his unique series called Something Else. The presentation to Blush by Georgie Jessel in Miami was something else in itself.
Thank you very much.
And thank Liberace for making that suit.
He gave me 5 seconds to say thank you. He said thank them and leave. I want to tell you, I've been in television in the Tampa Bay area since 1963. Do you remember that?
1963. Christ, I got underwear older than that.
Godspeed, John Glenn. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Channel 13 was right in step when the world entered the space age. It was our equipment and crew which CBS chose to use for the pool coverage, feeding all 3 networks with scenes of the recovery of our first astronauts. first by way of videotape, and later the first live pictures ever from a splashdown. The first trip for a videotape unit and crew was aboard the carrier Randolph to record the return of Gus Grissom after he rode Freedom 7 to a watery landing downrange from Cape Canaveral in 1961. Our first manned space shot. The equipment was back aboard the Randolph the next year when Colonel Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. Even with the distortion in the soundtrack, you can share the feeling of that moment with the network director as he gives instructions to Channel 13 camera operator Joe Wizicki.
Joe, stay with him. That's the greatest bit in the world, Joe. Hey, go. Stay with him, Joe. Just say, hey, Glenn, and he'll turn around. Go ahead. Say, hey, Colonel. Go on, Joe. Go ahead, Joe. We did it to Khrushchev. I'm not joking. Say, hey, Glenn. Go on, Joe. You can't be court-martialed for it. Come on, Joe. Do me a favor, baby. You're Glenn. Hey, say, hey, Colonel. Turn around for TV. Go ahead. Atta baby! Atta baby! Atta baby! Atta baby, Joe! Oh, brother, what a shot you have, kid.
A name familiar to many newcomers, as well as old-timers in the Bay Area, is Don Harris, the NBC network correspondent killed in the People's Temple massacre in Guyana in 1978. Don got his start poking into strange places and situations on Channel 13 in the early 60s on a 5-minute segment called Pulse Extra. He and producer Bob Gilbert with photographer Jack Cosgrove roamed the area, the state, and the world looking for those stories outside the daily news budget. They helped found a school in El Salvador, filed reports from Japan, Europe, and South America. We saw Don on the edge of a volcano in Costa Rica and in a boat far up the Amazon River. Here at home, the Pulse Extra crew got credit for helping to calm the racial disturbances in 1966 here in Tampa, establishing communications between the protesters and the law enforcement officials. 10 years after he left Channel 13, Don was still following stories involving people when he went to Jonestown on that fateful trip in 1978. Sports have always been important in the Bay Area, and what's important to the community has always been important to Channel 13. That's why the station has always hired top people to cover this part of our informational programming, and why we hired a young fellow named Andy Hardy back in 1962, and made him sports director 6 years ago.
Sports in the Bay Area has been a long-time tradition, and Channel 13's coverage began in 1955 with Guy Bagley, who served as the first sports director at Channel 13. In April of 1957, a newspaper man took the big step entering the world of television. Salty Saul Flushman has covered Bay Area sports and fishing for over 1/2 century.
All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, let's step up here just a second and bring you the finale on the Salty Saul Budweiser show. And that is Salty Saul's Best Bet. Now, of course, if you're wondering what that means, over 20 years ago, I originated the idea of the best bet in the city of Tampa. And it's a pleasure to continue it on my new Budweiser show.
Flushman later became sports director at WTVT and was assisted by Russ Benedict and a graduate of Hillsborough High School by the name of Paul Reynolds. In 1962, Flushman added to his staff a young man out of the University of Houston. Sports continued to grow in the 60s, and Channel 13 treated fans to an extended look at the sports, including an inside look into the Cincinnati Reds spring training camp. In the 70s, football became a major force in the Bay Area. The University of Tampa became a small college power, and Channel 13 was the first Bay Area television station to air a weekly University of Tampa coaches show with Earl Bruce and Dennis Frizzell. This would set the stage for the first John McKay show in Tampa. When the Tampa Bay Buccaneers entered the National Football League back in 1976, Channel 13 was on the scene to send their first game back to the Bay Area, live from Los Angeles, California. Soccer took the Bay Area by storm in the 70s, and Channel 13 provided fans with detailed coverage of the Tampa Bay Rowdies, who won the league championship in their very first year of existence. While thousands of big-named athletes have been seen on Channel 13 through the years, some proved to be a real challenge.
I believe that tonight you're taking on Dory Funk. You have a fat chance of winning, and you have a head to match.
Andy, I learned my manners from those who have none.
I heard, Gene, that you once had your body insured for $100,000. I'd like to ask you, what did you do with the money?
Andy, touche. You are getting real sharp, and I understand the show has been a little drab, and that's why you invited yours truly down here. Stop shaking and shivering. You're breaking out in a cold sweat.
Channel 13 Sports continues to bring some of the finest athletes in the world into Bay Area living rooms. Here are some of the stars from the past.
A special spot in the Channel 13 broadcasting day always has been at noon. Pulse Midday became Pulse Plus when it expanded to a full hour of news, sports, weather information, and entertainment. The list of visitors on the show reads like a name-dropper's dream. Billy Graham, Norm Crosby, Robert Morse, Phyllis Diller, and dozens more. Before hostess Pat Colmenares, you may remember Sandy Miller. And before her, Gene Phillips. Pulse Plus, a tradition in the Bay Area for people looking for useful information and a little bit of fun to break up the day. To a lot of people, Channel 13 is synonymous with weather, and weather is synonymous with Roy Leap. Roy joined the station in 1957 when the late Charlie Stump was weather director. And from then on, the addition of new equipment and procedures has been limited only by the speed of the industry in developing them.
A quarter of a century has brought many changes and faces to the weather department. During those years, a continual evolution has taken place in the type of electronic weather gathering equipment used and the way we present weather information. Starting with little more than a desk, Charlie Stump was our first meteorologist in 1955. As the demand for weather information grew, so did our efforts, equipment, space, and staff. Remember the names that took us through those 25 years? Jerry Peterson, Nelson Medina, Pete Giddings, Pat Wilson, Bob Breck, Alan Motu, Carl Nichols, Mark Schumacher, Eric Meindl, Jim Pass, and others that helped behind the scenes and those who are with us today. Some are still in weathercasting across the nation from North Carolina to Alaska. From our closet-like office of 1959 to the Color Communication Center in 1965 to our hermetically sealed computer room of today, the equipment has kept pace with the development of technology. Channel 13 was first to have radar in Florida in 1959, and the first station to colorize it in 1976. We were first in the nation to use satellite tracking equipment in 1965, and the first to use the high-resolution pictures of GOES in 1975. First to broadcast color satellite loops in 1979, and the first television station to have its own complete weather satellite Earth terminal in 1979. From establishing an automatic weather station in St. Petersburg during 1966 to a cooperative tide gauge program in 1974. From the formation of a severe weather network of 30 observers in 1959 to over 300 observers in 1980. We are one of a few stations in the nation that has displayed the American Meteorological Society seal of approval for over 20 years, since its time of inception. In 1973, we received the AMS's Corporation Award for Outstanding Performance. Our efforts and advances through the years have permitted us to broadcast more reliable and credible reports daily, and in memorable emergencies, like Hurricane Donna of 1960. Alma of 1966, Gladys, 1968, and the recent Hurricane David of 1979. This waterspout film, taken in June of 1964, was aired live as we broke into CBS News with a video bulletin. That was early ENG for you. We haven't been without our bloopers and faux pas, though, like these.
Now, Pulse Weather with Channel 13 staff meteorologist Mike Reeves.
Well, I'm not ready yet. Good morning.
However, this position is about 130 miles to the east of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we just lost our era, even though it is still moving to the west-northwest. Still moving to the west-northwest, but we just lost it. And many more which have gone unrecorded. With the completion and our introduction of our Weather Vision system this year, we have at our disposal a system unequaled anywhere in television weathercasting, which permits for the first time the continuous variables of the atmosphere to be captured, archived, written in video color, stored, broadcast, or sent to a remote terminal location. Utilizing radars, satellites, and ground stations around the world, the computer gives our meteorologists access to pictures of the weather in real time. These pictures we pass along to our viewers. And since we are in the picture business, we believe our new system will spearhead weathercasting in the 80s.
Even some of the faces behind the scenes have become pretty familiar to the Bay Area. People very much involved with the community and its affairs. Buddy Sugg, who became manager when Gaylord Broadcasting took over the station early in its second year. Gene Dodson, who led the station and the Gaylord television and radio chain during most of the years of its growth. He brought with him as news director Crawford Rice, who later moved up to manage Gaylord stations from Texas to Seattle, and finally coming back to head up good old 13 and several other Gaylord Broadcasting properties. To Crawford, those first 25 years are just a beginning, a foundation for the really great things to come. Channel 13 has a tradition of being first with the best equipment, of picking the kind of people viewers like to have in their living rooms, of creating public service programs to meet the needs of the many different demands of a booming community. But we like to think that a comment once made by former CBS President Frank Stanton sums up what we strive for. Dr. Stanton said, "The most priceless asset any station can have is its character." We like to think that character is a tradition here at Channel 13.
Remember, let's go back in time again. Remember the way we started. Everything was new 25 years ago. What a great time to show for the memories. Looking ahead,